Welcome to another audit walkthrough video from SuperfastCPA. I'm Logan, and in today's video, we're going to be going over Audit Area 4. This is Section E5. This is a Remembering and Understanding topic. Identify requirements under Government Accountability Office Government Auditing Standards related to reporting on internal control over financial reporting and compliance with provisions of the law, regulations, contracts, grant agreements, and federal awards that have a material effect on the financial statements. So that's a pretty big topic there. And we're going to be doing it the SuperfastCPA way, which is diving straight into the questions to learn the material. Now, if you don't know much about our strategies, make sure you go to SuperfastCPA.com and sign up for our free 1-hour webinar training. Again, in that 1 hour, for free, we will teach you the key ingredients to passing the CPA exam so you don't waste months or even years failing exams. So make sure you check out the webinar, and after you watch that, you're going to want to learn more. So make sure you also check out becoming a Superfast CPA Pro member. Superfast CPA Pro members get access to the full 10-question versions of these videos. So in today's video, we're only going over 5 questions. But again, members will get access to the full 10-question video where they can get a little bit more help and a little bit more understanding. So if you like this and you like our other videos, make sure to check out becoming a pro member. Now with all that, let's dive straight into the questions. All right, here we are at question 1. Let's just dive straight in. We're talking about government auditing standards, or basically this is the stuff under GAGAS, most of this. Which of the following best describes how government auditing standards, GAGAS, differ from generally accepted auditing standards, which is GAS, or GAAS, for financial audits? So what's the difference between GAGAS and generally accepted auditing standards? If you don't know, that's okay. We're going to go through this. Option A, GAGAS requires auditors to express an opinion on the effectiveness of internal control over compliance. Option B, GAGAS eliminates the need to perform tests of controls when auditing governmental entities. Option C, GAGAS requires auditors to describe the scope of testing of internal control and compliance with laws and regulations. Or option D, GAGAS prohibits the use of materiality thresholds when assessing compliance with laws and regulations. So what is the difference between GAGAS and generally accepted auditing standards? So, normal auditing standards. What's the difference? If you don't know, that's okay. We're going to use this question to learn what we need to know. So let's go into the explanation together. All right, here we are. The answer is C. GAGAS requires auditors to describe the scope of testing of internal control and compliance with laws and regulations. And you might have been able to pick that out just from the blueprint title, but let's dive into this. While GAS, or GAAS, provides the foundation for financial audits, GAGAS, also known as the Yellow Book, and you probably have heard that before, incorporates all GAS requirements and adds specific responsibilities. So it has the normal auditing requirements, but it also has additional ones. One of the key differences is that GAGAS requires the auditor to describe the scope of testing of both internal controls over financial reporting and compliance with applicable laws and regulations. So they have to describe the scope of those two things very specifically. This goes beyond GAS, which does not mandate such disclosures. Auditors do not express an opinion on the effectiveness of internal control over compliance, so that makes A incorrect. They do still perform tests of controls, so that makes B incorrect. And they do continue to apply materiality concepts in compliance assessments, and so that makes D incorrect because they do that. So we learned a little bit about the difference between GAGAS and GAS. So again, GAS is just the normal auditing standards. GAGAS is government auditing standards, and they add additional things. Now let's go to the next question. All right, here we are at question 2, and this is a great question to show you something I always like to show if it's an option. You want to read the last sentence of the question first. Now, this might seem a little bit silly in this case because there's only 2 sentences, but this is a really good habit to be in for test day because reading the last sentence of the question frequently will give you context for what the question is about, so that as you're reading through the rest of the question, you already kind of have an idea what you're looking for and what you're dealing with. This is a very good test day strategy. Again, it might seem silly to do it sometimes, but you want to be in the habit of doing it. So let's do that here. Which of the following best describes the auditor's responsibilities related to internal control over financial reporting? So let's go up to the top. A CPA is performing a financial statement audit under government auditing standards, or again, GAGAS. Which of the following best describes the auditor's responsibilities related to internal control over financial reporting? Okay, so we learned a little bit about this in the first question, but we're going to expand on it here. Let's go through the options. Option A, the auditor is required to express an opinion on the effectiveness of internal control and include it in the audit report. Option B, the auditor is required to obtain an understanding of internal control and issue a written report describing the scope and results of testing. Option C, the auditor should assess internal control but is not required to communicate deficiencies unless requested by management. Or option D, the auditor must assign audit procedures to detect all control deficiencies and report them individually to the legislative oversight body. Okay, so again, based on what we learned in the first question, you actually might already have an idea of what they need to do, but if not, that's okay. Let's dive into the explanation together to start learning. All right, here we are. The answer is B. The auditor is required to obtain an understanding of internal control and issue a written report describing the scope and results of testing. And again, we kind of mentioned that in question 1, so we're going to go into it more here. Under GAGAS, auditors must obtain an understanding of internal control over financial reporting, assess control risk, and design procedures accordingly. So they have to design procedures to be able to do those things. Even if no control deficiencies are found, the auditor must issue a written report describing the scope of the testing performed and any findings, such as significant deficiencies or material weaknesses. So again, this is one of those extra responsibilities under GAGAS. They have to describe the scope in a written report of them looking over the internal controls, and they have to be able to understand it. They have to assess the control risk, and that's kind of what we are going over here. GAGAS does not require the auditor to express an opinion on the effectiveness of internal control, so that would make A incorrect. Auditors are required to communicate certain deficiencies, which would make C incorrect because they do have to communicate some of them, and they are not expected to detect or report all control issues or report each item individually to a legislative body. That would make D incorrect. So again, we learned kind of the idea behind what auditors have to do under GAGAS when it comes to internal controls in this question. Now let's go to the next question. All right, here we are at question 3. Which of the following is required under government auditing standards, or GAGAS, regarding the auditor's responsibility for compliance with laws and regulations? Okay, so we learned about internal control. That's one of those extra responsibilities. Now we're talking about compliance with laws and regulations, which is another extra responsibility under GAGAS. Let's go through the options. Option A, the auditor must express an opinion on compliance with all laws and regulations that apply to the audited entity. Option B, the auditor is required to test compliance only when control risk is assessed as high. Option C, the auditor must report only violations of laws and regulations that result in monetary penalties. Or option D, the auditor must describe the scope of testing of compliance with applicable laws, regulations, contracts, and grant agreements in the audit report. Okay, so again, based on what we learned in the first question and kind of just probably logical guessing, you could probably think of the correct answer. If you want, pause the video, think about this, and when you're ready, come back, we'll look at the answer together. All right, here we are. The answer is D. The auditor must describe the scope of testing of compliance with applicable laws, regulations, contracts, and grant agreements in the audit report. Again, you probably could have guessed that one if you remembered what the blueprint topic is for this video, but with that, let's dive straight into the explanation. Under GAGAS, the auditor is required to test and report on compliance with provisions of laws, regulations, contracts, and grant agreements that could have a material effect on the financial statements. The report must include a description of the scope of that testing, even if no non-compliance is found. So they still have to do the report, they still have to have it there, even if the non-compliance isn't found. GAGAS does not require an opinion on overall compliance unless it is a compliance audit under a different framework, and so that would have made A incorrect. And we're not really going to talk about compliance audits really at all, so don't worry about that, at least not in depth. Auditors must report material instances of non-compliance, not just monetary penalties, so that would have made C incorrect, and compliance testing is required regardless of control risk assessment, so that would have made B incorrect. So we learned, again, a little bit more about that extra responsibility under GAGAS, about reporting on compliance with laws and regulations. Now let's go to the next question. All right, here we are at question 4. Under government auditing standards, again, that's GAGAS, which of the following best describes the auditor's responsibility regarding illegal acts identified during a financial statement audit? Okay, so let's dive into the options. Option A, the auditor must assess whether the illegal act has a material effect on the financial statements and determine whether reporting to external parties is necessary. Option B, the auditor is not required to take further action if management refuses to report the act. Option C, the auditor should report all illegal acts directly to the public regardless of materiality. Or option D, the auditor must immediately withdraw from the engagement and notify the AICPA if an illegal act is detected. So again, what is the auditor going to do if they find illegal acts? Pause the video to think about this if you want, but again, we haven't really talked about this very much. This is something new, so let's go to the explanation if you haven't already paused the video. All right, here we are at the answer. A, the auditor must assess whether the illegal act has a material effect on the financial statements and determine whether reporting to external parties is necessary. So let's dive into the explanation. Under GAGAS, auditors must evaluate whether illegal acts have a material effect on the financial statements and whether management has taken appropriate action. If management refuses to act, auditors may be required to report the matter to parties outside the audited entity, especially if the audit was performed under contract with a government agency. So if there's other people involved, like a government agency that the auditor is under contract from, even if management is not going to fix anything and, the auditor reported it to management and management's not doing anything, the auditors might still need to report that illegal act to somebody else. Auditors are not required to report all illegal acts to the public, so that would have made C incorrect, nor can they ignore management inaction, which is option B. Immediate withdrawal and AICPA notification, which was D, are not standard or required actions under GAGAS for illegal acts. Again, they don't necessarily have to withdraw from the engagement, but they may have to tell an outside agency or an outside party about it if management isn't going to fix it. Now with that, let's go to the next question. All right, here we are at question 5. Again, we're doing that strategy of reading the last sentence first. Which of the following best describes the auditor's responsibility under GAGAS? Again, imagine you were on test day and you see that, you immediately know you're dealing with government auditing, so that would help you kind of be thinking about it as you go through the rest of it. Now let's go to the top. An auditor performing a financial statement audit under government auditing standards, again that's GAGAS, identifies indicators of potential fraud involving senior management. Which of the following best describes the auditor's responsibility under GAGAS? So now we're talking about fraud. Let's go through the options. Option A, the auditor must report the matter to the AICPA's ethics division immediately. Option B, the auditor should document the concern but take no further action unless law enforcement is involved. Option C, the auditor should extend audit procedures as needed, and if material fraud is confirmed, communicate it in the report on compliance. And then option D, the auditor should issue a disclaimer of opinion on the financial statements and withdraw from the engagement. So based on what we've learned so far, you might have a decent guess at what this would be. If not, that's okay. We're going to look at the answer together right now. All right, here we are at the answer C. The auditor should extend audit procedures as needed, and if material fraud is confirmed, communicate it in the report on compliance. So let's go through this. Under GAGAS, auditors must investigate potential fraud by extending audit procedures as necessary. If the fraud is found to be material, it must be disclosed in the report on compliance. If management refuses to take appropriate action, the auditor may be obligated to report the matter to outside parties, such as those who contracted or requested the audit. Reporting to the AICPA, which was option A, is not required. Ignoring the issue, which was option B, violates GAGAS responsibilities. Of course, you can't just ignore it. And then withdrawing from the engagement and disclaiming an opinion, that was option D, may be appropriate in extreme cases, but is not the default response. Again, the default response is that they are going to extend their audit procedures if needed to kind of make sure that the fraud is material or not. And then based on that, they might communicate it to other people, or they're at least going to communicate it in the report. Now with that, we learned a lot about basically government auditing, the few extra responsibilities that there are in these 5 questions. Now, before we do anything else, let's do one more part of the SuperFast CPA process called pillar topics. Now, the idea behind pillar topics is as you're going through the questions to learn the material, you will notice the things that keep popping up. You've seen 2, 3, 4, 5 questions trying to teach you about the responsibilities that are under GAGAS, such as the internal control responsibility or the compliance with laws and regulations responsibility. Again, we covered those, and if you've seen those in multiple questions, that's the idea behind pillar topics. You take a second and you take the things that you notice throughout multiple questions and you write them out in your own words as the pillar topics. And as you're doing this each day, you are building your own personal repository of the most important things you learned from the questions so that you are ready for the exam come test day. So let's go ahead and take a look at the pillar topics for this video. All right, here we are at the pillar topics. Let's just dive straight in. First off, GAGAS additional responsibilities. Again, we've talked about that. Let's say it one more time. Auditors must describe the scope of their testing of internal control and compliance with laws and regulations, which is not required under GAS. Those are the 2 big responsibilities that you for sure absolutely need to remember. If you forget everything else from this video, but you remember that those are the 2 additional responsibilities, that is the most important thing that you need to remember from this video, again, is that they have to include the scope of their testing of internal control and compliance with laws and regulations. Okay, let's go to the next one. They have to have a written report on internal control. This report must describe the scope of testing and findings and may be included in the audit report or issued separately. Now let's talk about the scope of testing of compliance. And again, these are the 2 big responsibilities, internal control and testing of compliance. Auditors must describe their procedures for assessing compliance with laws, regulations, contracts, and grant agreements that could materially affect the financial statements. And then now let's talk about material illegal acts. If management fails to act, the auditor may be required to report the matter to external parties, such as funding or oversight agencies. And then finally, potential fraud. Material fraud must be communicated in the report on compliance, and external reporting may be necessary if management does not respond appropriately. So again, we learned about mainly the additional responsibilities, which is about internal control and testing of compliance, but we did learn a little bit about illegal acts and potential fraud when it comes to GAGAS. And with that, we've learned the most important things for this blueprint topic in this video. And remember, we're only doing 5 questions today, but SuperFast CPA Pro members are going to get access to the full 10-question version of this video, where they'll get an extra 5 questions to be able to kind of learn a little bit more and help this sink in better. So if you liked this and you like our other videos, make sure you check out becoming a SuperFast CPA Pro member to get access to the full videos and to, of course, a lot of other great stuff, including something called the Pro Course. Now, if you want to learn more about the Pro Course and becoming a Pro member, the easiest way and the best way is actually by first going to SuperfastCPA.com and signing up for our free 1-hour webinar training. In that 1 hour, you'll learn a lot more about SuperFast CPA, and we'll teach you the key ingredients to passing the CPA exam, and it will give you a much better path to, again, learning about the Pro Course, about becoming a Pro member, and hopefully becoming a Pro member. So check out the webinar, check out becoming a Pro member. If you liked the video, make sure to like it and leave a comment. I hope this was helpful, and I will see you in the next video.